All pity choked with custom of fell deeds, and Caesar's spirit ranging for revenge, with Ate by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry havoc, and let slip the dogs of war, that in this foul deed shall smell above the earth, with carrion men groaning for burial. So, happy Ides of March, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a folk tale. We're going to start our discussion on folk tales with one of my favorites. It's called The Miser and His Gold. Well, we're going to talk about how they're classified a little bit, but mainly we're going to focus here on this channel on their psychological meaning or psychodynamic meaning. Now, it's important that we recognize that when we take folk tales and their variants and then look at cross-culturally, what we're going to see are the universal meanings that emerge from that. That does not mean that every folk tale can be boiled down to nothing but universal meanings, because there's always going to be local meanings too. There's local variants, and those are there for a reason. So we treat that just like we would a dream. There are universal elements in dreams, but the person whose dream you're looking at had that particular dream on that particular day for a reason too. So we don't want to overlook that either. But since I'm not going to be looking at variants all over the world in minute detail and just basically looking for the themes, we're going to look mainly at focusing on the universal meanings. So what is this one? So the Miser and His Gold is classified as 1305 in the ATU Folktale classification scheme. I'll give you a link below. And here's how it goes. So the story goes that you have a wealthy, very wealthy miser, meaning, of course, what a miser is someone who hoards a lot of treasure and all of their money. I mean, there's people like that are alive today, certainly, all over the world, especially in this country. But he gets a strange request. So one of the workers that works for him says, if I could forego my pay, I would love to have a chance to take just a glimpse of your treasure hoard. So the miser thinks that's a strange request. He says, well, okay, fine. Why? Well, the worker comes up to him and he says, well, if I could do that, then I would get the same satisfaction that it gives you. So after hearing that, the miser repents and gives away all his gold to the needy. So you can see why that's a clever story. There's another version of this. Another version is that the miser's treasure is stolen. He goes to a wise woman for advice, or a wise man, and she says, well, I'll tell you what you need to do. Just imagine your treasure hoard. And the miser says, well, what good is that going to do? And of course she says, well, that'll give you just as much pleasure as it did before it was stolen. So what do you think the meaning of a story like this might be? But before we get into that, I do want to point out that there are versions of this story all over the globe. So you can see this in Aesop's Fables, in Irish sources, in Spanish, German, Romanian, even in India and China and Tunisia. There are versions of this story. So it's something that speaks to universal condition. Obviously, one of the things that carries it forward and makes it more resonant is that it's funny. It's got kind of a nifty reversal in it. But I think that there's something deeper going on with this story. And I tend to think that about any story or folk tale that is able to be independently invented all over the globe or survive centuries of transmission, for example. So I think one of the things it does is it really highlights the distinction between a physical object and then the imaginary object or the imagination representation of that object, and the way in which the imaginary is in its way real, just like the physical one is. So the way this is demonstrated very vividly in the folktale is how the miser is living his whole life based on the premise that all I need to do is just have this huge hoard of treasure and I'm fulfilled and my meaning is satisfied. Whatever it is that I'm looking for in life, that's what I want. But it's entirely in his imagination that this happens, which of course the other characters in the story point out to him. So that's very interesting, and of course there's a deep moral in this too, which is that the hoarding aspect, it may satisfy a psychological need, but in essence you don't even really need the thing that you're hoarding. You just need to have it in your imagination, because they don't do anything with it. So I think that there's definitely a cautionary tale in this. Here's another variant. So this one is actually 1306. It's related to the previous one that we talked about. It's a little different too. In this version, the miser falls into a well, and the men from all around rush up to try to rescue him. And they reach down and they say, "Give us your hand, give us your hand." But of course the miser, being extremely greedy, refuses to give anything. So he stays at the bottom of the well. Well, the men are exasperated by this. What are we going to do about this guy? So they go to try to find the wise man or the wise woman, who's always in these sorts of stories. And the wise man here says, "Okay, here's what you do. You go to the well, and instead of saying, 'Give us your hand,' ask him to take your hand." Well, what's the difference between that? Just do it. So of course they go and they say that, and at which point he agrees, and they're able to pull him out. So again, it's all about the perspective. Even though they are exactly the same action, the perspective of the miser couldn't be more different. Because, and again, all of these characters in folktales are extremes. They're very black and white, they're very extreme, but they're that way because they are able to make a point with these stories that way. So again, it's funny because he's so greedy he refuses to give even a hand, even though it's helping him out of a well. So it shows the folly of that kind of ultra greedy position. But at the same time, it also, on a deeper level, it shows you that the exact same event can have the opposite meaning depending on what your perception is and how you perceive that event to be within your own mind. So what's really interesting, I think, about all of these different variants of this story, which at heart is a rather simple story, really, but it has a very powerful meaning, I think, and the meaning is involved in the imagination itself. Okay, one of the subjects, of course, of this channel in its entirety. But in this, that's why I'm choosing this particular folktale to start off and kick off the discussion of folktales with. So what it does is it shows us, rather than simply telling us, what the effects of the miser's hoard can have on anybody who looks at it. It warns us not to hoard. If we think of the treasure as the treasures of the imagination, because of course, as the folktale points out, there's really no difference in what the miser gets out of the treasure hoard, whether he has it or not. So long as he can visualize it, then he's getting everything he needs to out of it, because he never uses it. So it says there's something very special, very unique, and very powerful going on here. It's this process, and that is the imagination itself. It's unique, it's powerful, but it's not limitless. And in order for it to actually result in something tangible, it has to be connected to the physical world. So as powerful as the imagination is, I think what the story is telling us is that it's not limitless. It can lead you astray, but it can also be incredibly powerful. It can be very satisfying. So, like many things, it's got a double edge to it. So I think you might be able to say that the moral of the story is that one should not hoard one's imagination, but at the same time, one should not discount how important it can be. See you next time.